Hello, Camp Pros, and welcome to the Camp Hacker Podcast. My name is Travis Allison. I am pleased to be here on a special edition to talk with Mike Stasko. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, Mike, you are taking on a really interesting project and reached out to us because I think also it's good to reach out to camp people with a cool project like this, sort of a dream. You are going to be doing a movie about camp.
Yeah. This is something, 25, 30 years in the making since I first started going to camp when I was, 6 or 8 years old. I've always been into filmmaking, but as a teenager, you don't know exactly what your career is going to be. So you start to absorb, take in all the funny things that happen at camp, and in the back of your head, there's always this itch like, oh, this would make a great movie, or this should be in a movie. And anyone who's a camp person knows exactly what I'm talking about. Like the average day, you could take one day of camp and be like, wow, that whole day could just be a film right there. There's too many crazy things that happen. So just like anyone else, just been collecting that data in my head. And turns out I'm 37 now. I've been a filmmaker the last 15 years. I've been a professor the last 10 years of film. And I've done 4 feature films, about 40 episodes of TV. And I'm now at the state in the Canadian industry where I can kind of greenlight my projects. And this is the one that it's all kind of accumulated to, was make the ultimate Canadian summer camp film.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, I definitely want to ask you some more about your Indiegogo campaign and about the movie. But before we get too far down that, I wonder how did you get connected to camp in the first place?
There was a long line of, I'm from Windsor, and I just moved back here the last few years. A long line of Windsorites who were connected to, oddly enough, the YMCA Camp Kitchakowana, which is the Midland YMCA overnight camp. And that dates back to 1919, that camp. They're actually going to be celebrating their centennial next year. So it was just one of those things where like the parents went there. My mom went to different camps as well. And then just enough of the neighborhood kids started going to that camp. And I think when I was 10 years old, I started going there. Even before that, I would go to, there's the YMCA Geneva Park, which is the Arulia camp. And I'd been going there since birth as a family camp. So I already had ties into the YMCA community and the idea of the freedom of summertime running around through the forest, and you see your parents at breakfast and dinner, and that's about it. So it was just a natural progression that once you got old enough, you would then go on to Kitchie, and of course, spent 7 years as a camper there, did the leadership, was a counselor, was senior staff, overstayed my welcome into that senior staff years on and on, kept on going back. So it's a family tradition. I have 3 older sisters that all did it, a younger brother that all did it as well.
Yeah. It's amazing. So for you, when you're a camper, what were your favorite moments in the camp day?
As far as moments, I just like around like the meal table, just the absurd off the wall humor you'd get from your counselors. Because when you're 11 years old, your counselors are like 17 and 18, but they're kind of like 45 in your head.
Yeah.
You don't realize, like I meet people who are my counselors now that are 4 years older than me. When I was 13, they were 17, but they seem like they were 40-year-olds. And they would just say and do the wildest and crazy things. And you're like, this is an adult. We're at a dinner table. How are they doing this? And it kind of all of a sudden pulls out this personality and this humorous side of you as a young kid you didn't know you had, or that was allowed to happen. And you could make these kind of jokes and dress up in crazy costumes and do these all kinds of funny skits. So it's really like one of those things where what I like most about the camp and my memories are these dormant, latent pieces of my personality that I don't know if they would have ever come out unless I went to camp and kind of was in that environment where they got to really foster.
Yep, I love those. I love those things and those moments. Did you have a favorite activity at camp?
I was big into sailing. So, Yeah, so all the camps, I mean, you do everything. You do canoeing and kayaking and swimming and all those things. But sailing was the one thing that I caught on to really young and kept on doing it. So at the point when you become a counselor, senior staff, you go and you specialize. And I ended up being like the head of sailing at any camp that I worked at there on afterward.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Did you have, or do you remember any moment? One of my ongoing theories is that a lot of leadership that comes out of camp is this feeling of being noticed by someone you look up to, even if they're a 45-year-old, 17-year-old. Did you have a particular moment where you felt noticed or appreciated by a camp staff member that really stuck with you?
Yeah, I think when I started doing a lot of camps have that like LIT and CIT system.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
again, you're 15, 16, but you'll be placed in a cabin to assist the counselors, and the kids are 13, So again, not much of an age spread. But the kind of the hierarchy of how it works, everyone buys into the system.
Yeah.
And just the idea of you given the responsibility as a 16-year-old to walk eight 12-year-olds down to the beachfront and make sure they all used shampoo in their hair and double check that they use shampoo in their hair and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Being put into a position of responsibility and caring for other people at that age doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
Usually if you're, usually your first moment of responsibility at 16 is, making it to your part-time job on time and punching in the clock and then flipping the burgers and stuff. But so to have the responsibility over other humans and genuinely wanting to make sure that they're safe and they're having a good time, that kind of instills leadership really quickly.
Right. It does. It does. What sort of camp stuff has really stuck with you? What camp lessons do you find have carried through for you?
Well, I've been working as a film professor for the last 10 years. I'm currently at the University of Windsor, and the ability to publicly speak and to hold an audience and engage them.
Yeah.
Something that I learned at camp that I don't always see with other professors is the idea of trying to mix up the way you'll teach someone. So
Yeah.
the most common picture you form in your head, if I say you're at university and a professor is teaching you, you think of a 3-hour lecture. And unfortunately, that is sometimes the case where a professor will just lecture for 3 hours. They'll put up, maybe a PowerPoint, but for the most part, it's someone talking to someone else. Camp, through whether it was teaching sailing or engaging a full cabin of kids, it taught me about doing brainstorming activities, role playing, guided discovery, discussion, demonstration, all these other ways that you can teach someone and engage their mind. So now when I make my lesson plans, I make sure there's at least 3 different types of teaching and ways to engage the students. So that talking will max out maybe at 20 minutes before I have them stand up and grab something and let's do something to show it.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. That's such a good camp lesson to leave. Have you had people younger than you who would be the 11-year-olds in your cabin or the 11-year-olds when you were in university? Have you had them reach out to you and say, thank you, or you've had some impact on my life?
Yeah, and it's one of those times that when that happens, you reflect how you must have seemed to the people that were older than you. Because I had one a local guy who actually, his name's Greg. He came and worked on my last film, and now I'm 37. He's now 32, and he ended up being the script supervisor on my film set. And he's like, "Did you know that you were my camp counselor back in 1997? And when it was my birthday, you put me up on your shoulders and you had everyone sing to me and you made a big deal about it." And he's like, "I'll never forget that moment." And it made me want to be a camp counselor. And I'm, smiling to him, but I honestly don't remember it because that's everyday life at camp is, oh my God, it's your birthday. Let's make a big deal about it. Let's go sneak and pretend to get you a cake and all that kind of stuff. So you hear those things of these things that stick with them. And then I look back, I look at the counselors that I have and all the funny things they did. and the ways they made me inspire. And I imagine if I told them, they would probably say, yeah, I don't remember it too much because that was day in, day out kind of thing. So
all the time. Yeah. So what did you take from your camp experiences to create the script for the movie?
So for this movie, it's a period piece. It takes place in the summer of 1990, and it's based on what actually happened to Kitschy that summer, where it had to go co-ed for the first time. So
Yeah.
a lot of camps beforehand were boys in July, girls in August kind of thing. But during the 80s and 90s, they decided to make things more viable. We got to go co-ed year round because it amalgamates a lot of the senior staff. You're maximizing resources, maximizing how many canoes and kayaks you bought and that sort of thing. So it made sense economically. So what I was looking for was that summer, the first summer that it happened. And my memories as being a young camper of the kind of clash that was happening between boys camp and girls camp. And all the conflict just basically came from, the boys weren't allowed to pee wherever they wanted now. So they hated the girls and vice versa. So it was something that worked itself out pretty well, but it was just a reason to be mad at the other sex kind of thing.
Right.
And obviously this continued for many years. And when you make a film, you try to really truncate the narrative, right? Like you make more two-dimensional characters, you fit a lot of story into it. So the final film, when it comes out, it's not in a replica of this is exactly what happened. It's basically 20 years of memory crammed into one summer that takes place over a couple of weeks kind of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a lot of the comedy and the things that happen are things that did happen in real life, but you amalgamate characters, you amalgamate stories and stuff like that.
But still, it sounds like stuff that people who went to camp or who love camp, they'll see lots of things that they recognize. Or there's this funny camp thing where songs or traditions or stuff like that, it's this weird, you're in a parallel universe, but it's so close, it's just one little bit off, where songs are just one, the last bit of one bar is just a little bit different, the tune's a little bit different. I imagine it's going to be like that for people who watch the film too.
Yeah, I've been looking at every camp has their their different all camp events or whatever where they pit sides against each other. And at Kitschy they had Lumberman versus Voyager was the big one.
Yeah.
So then I started looking at, I'm like, was that just unique to Kitschy, or was that did other camps have it? And other camps did have that exact title, Lumberman versus Voyager, but then you find some that are Lumberman versus Pioneers. They're just change the names
off a tiny bit.
And then you read and then you sing the songs that they did, and it's the same thing except they change one or two words. So with this film, you create the narrative with the characters and the storylines, but all those little camp things about, the one kid that was really good at hacky sack, or the kids who would try to eat, 8 crackers in under 1 minute kind of thing.
Yeah.
They're all in there, but it's all background kind of item. It kind of dresses up the scene. So you still want the scenes to work in a narrative way, but you want those camp people to kind of recognize and poke and look in the background and see these very camp things happening.
Right. So the central conflict in the script is then over two cultures fitting together? Is that fair?
Yeah. So the first act is the main boy counselors and the main girl counselors. It's the summer before 1989, and they get the news, okay, guess what? Next summer it's co-ed, and neither of them like this idea. Second act starts off where the two have to coexist early 1990 summer, and it's not going well. Their conflict is bleeding through to the kids. They're seeing it. Things aren't running well. They're kind of self-destroying the camp, obviously in a comedic, way. Yeah. And then, without giving too much away, but it's pretty obvious. The end of the second act is they realize, oh my God, our camp's going to close. Corporate is coming tomorrow. And if we don't show them that we have a great camp, they're going to shut us down. So then the two sexes rally together and work together, and they figure things out kind of thing. So the plot isn't meant as anything new or far reaching or whatever. It's the idea of how can I have a thin enough plot and just fit as much comedic camp stuff in it as possible. That's what I did.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good. That's great. Sounds awesome. But I will say, for this community, there have been camp people that have hurt this community before. One of the things that as a camp community, we bump up against all the time is that people who haven't grown up at camp think that camp is meatballs and wet hot American summer, and that's something that we think about all the time because it comes up from parents. It's like, you guys are just like meatballs. There's no way I send my kids to there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you've got a story or plot that's going to involve some of the fun stuff and show off the good stuff too.
Yeah, and I grew up at camp in the 80s and 90s, and in all honesty, the safety measures, for example, weren't the same, right? Not everyone was wearing life jackets or putting on helmets, and so and you wouldn't do a head count at every time you go to lunch and dinner and that kind of stuff. Where all of that has been, great now. It's changed for the better, and they're all are these safety measures. But in the film, I don't really plan. There's no scenes where I'm showing that side of it. There's not enough time or room for it. So, even in the camp, I remember in the 80s, the guys would go in nude skinny dipping in the morning kind of thing, which wouldn't happen nowadays kind of thing. But none of that is being concentrated in the film. That'd be a whole kind of different film. That would be more of the, like you said, the raunchy meatballs kind of thing. Which I think could still be a great film, and that could be made very well one day. But this is more just the comedy, the communities coming together, and kind of just celebrating the fun things about camp.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds really great. So, Mike, how can people support you if they like the idea of what you're talking about and want to support your Indiegogo campaign?
Yeah. Well, we're raising funds for the film. The website for the film is boysvgirlsmovie.ca. And from that you can get to, we do have an Indiegogo page that you can get to from there, and we have all the normal social media, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and stuff. But the Indiegogo runs until about May 5th, and it's doing well so far, and we'd like to do even better with it. It isn't the main section of our funding, though. I have private equity investors and distribution and that kind of stuff set up, so it's not a make or break thing. But we do have some pretty fun rewards on that Indiegogo. The normal ones of DVD or T-shirts and that kind of stuff. But one of the ones that I really like is one reward level is you can have your camp photo featured in the end credits of the film.
Awesome.
Which is kind of a typical 80s, 90s things movie where during the end credits you would see wacky photos from the film. Yeah. So I thought, why not do that with the Indiegogo users? So anyone who's watching this now, if you want your embarrassing or fun or whatever photo from camp forever ingrained in the end of a feature film, then that's one of the things you can do.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is such a great reward. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's fun. Cool. Well, Mike, I really appreciate I appreciate your time today. I wish you all the best with this campaign, and we'll look forward to spreading this interview, whatever we can do to help. But thanks for putting this out. It sounds awesome.
Great. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Mike.